Well, welcome to Faith, Culture, Politics in Australia with Mark, and I'm your host, Mark. And as many people know, here in South Australia, we're approaching an election in March, and I'm intending to catch up with candidates between now and March who would obviously like the opportunity to come on to explain what they're all about and their party as well. And today I have got someone with me today, but before I introduce them, as always, encourage you to follow along, hit that like and subscribe button. You'll notice there's a bit of a change in branding. I'm transitioning from one brand to the other. Website's just about done, so you'll be able to follow along there as well. But for now, welcome on board, and I'll introduce our guest for today, which is Christopher Brohier from Family First Party here in South Australia. Just going to give you a little bit of a run through about Christopher. He's a barrister who has practiced law in South Australia for about 42 years. Christopher has worked in many country areas as well as Adelaide. For the last 7 years, Christopher has also worked for the Australian Christian Lobby as the SA, Tasmanian and Northern Territory State Director, and recently as the National Director of Policy. Christopher has been in the forefront of most of the state and federal policy issues in which the ACL campaigned. He, with his wife Amanda, led the No campaign for the 2017 plebiscite in relation to same-sex marriage, was deeply involved in the successful campaign against the decriminalisation of prostitution in SA, the campaign against abortion to birth legislation in SA, and the campaign to retain federal protections for Christian and faith-based schools and institutions. Christopher was a co-founder of the Human Rights Law Alliance, which is now involved in key freedom litigation. He is currently counsel assisting for the HRLA. Christopher has represented Christian men and women in many cases where they have been discriminated against because of their faith, including representing Kathy Clubb and Graham Preston in their challenge to exclusion zone laws in the High Court. Christopher has had extensive experience in dealing and negotiating with politicians and understands the political process well. Christopher has been married to Amanda for 33 years. They have 4 wonderful adult children, a beautiful daughter-in-law, 2 Labradors and 6 chooks. Christopher has been a Christian for 44 years and is a member of Trinity Church in Lockleys. So welcome to the podcast, Christopher Brohier. Quite a bit in that. We're obviously going to be talking about Family First Party and your candidacy and the election, but there's quite a bit more in your background that we could quite easily unpack and make, possibly another full-length podcast just in regards to a lot of the things you're involved in. So welcome.
Thanks, Mark, and good to be here.
Yeah, no, great. I just wanted to kick off, I guess, in light of reading that out just then, and it's quite topical before we get into some policy stuff with Family First Party. HRLA is obviously pushing back quite hard, and you're involved with that. The Combating Anti-Semitism, Hate and Extremism Bill 2026. Now that's concerning a lot of people, obviously in Australia, people that I'm in contact with. As an independent podcaster, there's some concerns around censorship. There's some small political parties that could be caught up in a lot of this if they're going against the grain. What are some of the real concerns that South Australians or Australians should have in regards to this bill or this legislation?
So the bill that passed did 2 things in broad terms. It increased penalties for existing Commonwealth laws prohibiting the encouragement of violence, etc., on the ground of inter alia ethnic origin, and made it an aggravated offence if that was done by a minister of religion. So that was one part of it. The second part of it was to give the minister power on the recommendation of the head of ASIO if ASIO thought the head of ASIO thought there was a risk that a particular group was likely to commit or encourage violence against another group on the basis of race or ethnic origin, to give the minister power to proscribe or ban that group, and there are then offences flowing if people associate with that group, etc. So they're the two broad areas of the bill, or the law now, because it passed Parliament. So in terms of the second, the real concern is that there's no judicial oversight. And it's, in my view, it's quite, it may be, these things are always difficult to say, but it's quite open to a challenge under the Constitution that it's unconstitutional because it removes, in effect allows the minister to impose a penalty quite apart from the involvement of any courts. And that could mean that the legislation is challenged. And some of the groups like that are subject to the legislation, like the group Hizb al-Tahrir has indicated in the press that they'll bring a challenge. So that's one big concern, that the executive, so we have three parts to our government: the executive, which enforces the laws, the legislature, which passes the laws, and the judiciary, which is independent of the other two, which decides if the laws have been broken or not. This gives the executive power to impose, in effect, penalties on citizens or groups of citizens without recourse to the courts. And in my view, that's a bad precedent. The first set of amendments, they're increasing the penalties, and the real new part of it is creating an aggravated offence if it's done by a minister of religion, etc. And in the light of Bondi, you can see the justification for it. Save and accept that it's always dangerous for governments to start passing legislation directly at religious faiths. That might seem an appropriate response given the outrage of Bondi, but we have to start thinking a bit wider than that. And the third level to that is this, that in my view, the sort of broad-based hate speech laws aren't really good legislation. We've got offensive conduct legislation, and I think I'm right in this. It used to be the case that offensive behaviour was illegal in New South Wales, but then they restricted it to conduct around schools and churches, etc. Now, if that hadn't happened, and if the police had the will, events like that took place on the Sydney Opera House after October 7, chants of "Where's the Jews?", "Gas the Jews", etc., could well be offensive behaviour. And really, it's the onus has always been on the authorities to act to pick up that small stuff, or it wasn't small, but to nip this escalating hate at the inception. And the real failure, which led to October 7, wasn't a failure of legislation. It was a failure of the authorities to act on the basis of using the tools that they did. They tried to sort of let things go, nothing to see here, and it didn't work. So it's the will to implement what we have that's important, not passing dramatic new laws which may have unintended effects down the line. So that's a long answer to.
Yeah, it's a very slippery slope because obviously a lot of Christians are always also concerned, and I know we know Curley Smith and Bernard Gaynor and people like that. If it's the slippery slope of how far this bill can eventually go at a federal level. I know the states have anti-discrimination processes and all that, but it's about the slippery slope of this this legislation and how far it can go, and that's, I think, one of the big concerns for many observers, from this.
Yeah. So at the moment, it's restricted in that second part of the bill to encouragement of violence, etc., on gender and race. But who knows where that'll end up?
Yeah, this is a concern. And just before we do move on to the other thing here, specifically in our state, and this was something that this is in regards to the Emergency Management Miscellaneous Amendment Bill 2024. Now, obviously, someone that's been through COVID, I was politically awakened in a lot of other things. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing now through COVID, and I'll push back on a lot of the stuff that happened there. But because we've got these treaties, these international treaties, the World Health Organization and so forth, but our state with Liberal and Labor and the Greens, and I think there was only one independent candidate that pushed back, was that bill that was passed through. And the concern around that and the bill that I'm talking about, so the concerns were that there's a new state of alert for those powers, ongoing extraordinary powers, lack of oversight and transparency, and a disruption and inertia. So potentially indefinite, lacking clear boundaries, centralised authority, no parliamentary review, and repeat confusion and fundamental rights curbed during COVID-19. And this is a lot of concerns around that. So would you have voted for something like this if you were in the Legislative Council already? Would you have passed that?
Oh, it's impossible to say what I would have done back then when I wasn't there. But I would say this, Mark, that is why we need a strong and independent upper house to hold the government to account and to hold the major parties to account. Because I recall when the COVID pandemic hit and the legislation was being passed, I contacted one of the members of Parliament and said, look, the legislation that was being proposed was then being proposed by a Liberal government. Can't override the fundamental rights and the opportunities for people to have recourse to the courts. And I helped a member of Parliament draft some amendments to the proposed legislation. That those amendments didn't get up. So what I can say is that in all of these issues, we have to have an opportunity for citizens to go to the courts to have things tested. Now, when there are emergencies, the governments have to act sometimes quickly, but we can't take away that right for citizens to go to the courts, because the courts have always been that place where an ordinary person can appeal and stand before the court against the government and put their case. And we must never take that away.
The challenge with that is that it's become so very expensive for anybody. Like all these things is almost, it's tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars just to be able to bring a case like that. So it's very, very challenging for the ordinary person, and especially through the challenges of COVID. So it's very tricky for a lot of people.
Yeah, so my proposal was that there be a simple means of people accessing the magistrate's court. And that can be done. We know that happens in things like small claims, where you can have ready access without legal representation. Both sides aren't allowed legal representation. So with some thought, something like that can be done.
Yeah, and I know that obviously you're involved with the human rights stuff on a Christian perspective in that as well, but the mandates, I think, were the biggest challenge for the population going forward, especially for people like myself that researched a lot and pushed back, and there was really no recourse. Ended up losing employment out of it during that time, and so many others did as well, or coerced because they needed to retain their job. So there's definitely things that people have learned over the last 5 years where they've actually lost a lot of trust in lots of institutions, and it's a long way back, I think, for those institutions to win trust of the population back. What your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think prior to COVID, Australians have always had a generally benign attitude to government. We always thought that historically the government was for us generally. But I think that view has shifted post-COVID. And I think we have to rebuild that because, as they say, democracy is a bad system, but it's better than anything else that we've got. So, and I think that's one of the reasons we need to have a strong independent upper house, and that's why I'm supporting and standing for Family First.
Yeah, good on you. Well, that's a good segue then, Christopher. Why Family First for you as a candidate? Why choose Family First as a party?
Family First has a long history in South Australia. So it was started by Andrew Evans and others back quite a while ago. And Family First held the line in South Australian Parliament on many issues. For example, even though we didn't have good abortion laws, we held the line on those laws right up till 2021, when under the Liberal government, abortion to birth legislation was introduced, and that was in the absence of Family First. And people like Andrew Evans and Dennis Hood and others provided a ballast on the conservative side of politics for the state. And that was very helpful for the welfare of our state. Once Family First then merged with a group called the Australian Conservatives, and that fell in a heap. And then we had the 2021 abortion to birth legislation, which I was in the campaign fighting it. We lost, but we got some good changes, which are not in many other places. We're the only state, I think, that bans sex selection abortions. They're trying to do that now in New South Wales, but we won that in the debate. And as a result of that, two ex-members of the Labor Party, Jack Stilling and Tom Kenyon, and Deepa Matthew, who is the lead upper house candidate, she'd been a Liberal member and she was to be a Liberal candidate for the upper house. She quit the Liberal Party on that basis and formed Family First. Mark II, if you like. Then, sorry, do you want me to just continue, or do you have a question?
Yeah, no, go for it, yep.
Lars Shelton, then, who'd been my first boss in this Christian lobby, in the Australian Christian lobby, he'd left and he became the national director of Family First. He still is. So that, I was still with the Australian Christian lobby. That gave me an affinity with Family First. And so once I quit ACL, I joined up with Family First. I was the lead Senate candidate in the last federal election. So that's sort of the mechanics of what led to me being involved. But the heart of it is that Family First is a family-based, policy-based party. We're quite open in supporting the Judeo-Christian virtues that have underpinned Australian society. Our constitution starts with the preamble that we, the people of New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, South Australia, Tasmania, join in an indissoluble commonwealth, humbly relying on Almighty God. That's in the preamble to our constitution. And
Amen.
If you look at our constitution, the biblical values are impregnated into the constitution. So one of the core tenets of our constitution is that we have representative government. Everybody gets a right to vote. And that's based on the understanding that we're all equal. That is a biblical concept. It is not a concept found anywhere else. It is not in any other faith. It is not a Marxist concept. It is very clearly a concept that comes from the Judeo-Christian heritage. That's number one. Number two, the doctrine of the separation of powers, so that we have the Parliament, the legislature, and the judiciary separate and independent. Again, that's an understanding that was worked out from a biblical view. So particularly the Americans realized that because we are so frail and because we are so prone to go wrong, and an accumulation of power in one group or one person inevitably leads to tyranny, we have that separation of powers. And again, that's a product of the Christian biblical worldview, the Judeo-Christian worldview. So that's in our constitution. We can't get away from that. The constitution provides that the Commonwealth cannot acquire property except on just terms. Again, that's because we have this understanding that you can't steal from people. And then the Constitution guarantees trial by jury. That's a direct line to the Magna Carta. And the Magna Carta was instituted back when it was in 1200 by Archbishop Langman to be an English Deuteronomy, a second English biblical principled law. So whatever people from the progressives' right side say, our country is founded on those principles. And Family First espouses those boldly. And we want to bring those front and center into our legislation supporting families.
Yeah, very right. And I can see, obviously, with your long relationship with the Australian Christian lobby, why you would be drawn to be involved with Family First Party based on those principles for sure. Yeah, and obviously looking into that a little bit. Obviously, the British Empire, the flags or the crosses in our flag, represent the saints. Back in 1901, when the states come together under federation, 98% of the population were Christians, identified as Christians. We've obviously slipped back a bit now, so there's a lot of work to do to get back there. But sounds like that's the plan there for Family First, to try and be a bit of a headwind into that. I just wanted to share quickly, obviously, numbers from 2022. Now, this is the lower house, and so Family First Party back then in 2022 is about 40,000 odd votes. Now, obviously, it's changed. The landscape's changed a bit. This was just based on first preferences. Then, obviously, you got preferences flowing in from there, and then if you're looking at the Legislative Council, you had yourselves there at about 33,000 votes there, and then obviously preferences brought it up to closer to the 50, I think 48, 50,000, which was about 0.5 of a quota. So I think the climate has changed quite a bit, but I did some calculation, did a bit of research, and I think it's around the 90 to 95,000 votes for the Legislative Council per candidate. Now, I'm looking at the landscape. There's definitely seems like there's more opportunity for Family First. I mean, to look at getting a candidate up. What's your thoughts compared to where we were in 2022, knowing how far the Liberal Party's fallen from its base? And I believe that the Labor Party's also quite on the nose with a lot of people. I think there's people are starting to realise that they've got a bit of a socialist bent, and the sort of socialist communist bent's kind of flowing out a bit, and people might be becoming aware. How do you see it in this election compared to back in 2022?
So I'll answer that internally and externally, Mark. So internally, in 2022, Family First Mark II had only been registered as a political party about a month before the election. So those who ran it did a mammoth job with practically nothing and did very well, because we were the second. Sarah Game got the last seat, and we were behind her by about, I don't know, 6,000 votes or something like that. So we did amazingly well, given we were starting from scratch. This time we're far more organised. We're still a small party, but we're far more organised internally, and we've had some good advertising. People may have seen our heard our radio ads, seen our TV ads. We've done letterboxing, etc. So, and we're hoping to field lots and lots of candidates in the lower house seats. And Deepa Matthew, who's our lead candidate, has been campaigning really for the last 8 years, ever since that election. So that's, the internals are better. And then the externals, which you commented on, it's very hard to predict what will happen here, because the Liberal vote has collapsed. I mean, some people say that the Liberals could end up with 1 or 2 or 3 seats. I don't know. But that vote's going to go somewhere. So some of it could go to Labor, some of it could go to One Nation, but some of it could come to us. The other external factor is that in that 2022 election, in the 2022 election, the 2 SA best seats weren't up because they were on the second half of the 8-year term. Mm-hmm. And this time, both those seats are up for grabs. So what will happen to those votes? Frank Pangala's not running for the upper house. Cory Bananas is, but what's going to happen to those votes? So there are a lot of different factors, and it's not clear what's going to happen, but I think your point is very valid. There is a great opportunity for us to get a seat, and I would think that our chances are reasonable. Certainly we've got a better chance than we had to win a Senate seat. It's a lot easier to win a council seat, and we're more down the track.
Yep. And just before we do get into some of the policies, now I just wanted to show this last little slide there. Obviously, this is another thing. This is what I say to voters a lot, though, is that 70% of votes actually got exhausted. So this is where people don't put preferences in for, if they're voting for another candidate or whatever. So it doesn't actually flow. So even if there is a like-minded party, let's say it is One Nation, or it's Fair Go Australia, or even United Voice, who seems to be more centre than left, like the other parties. It has a major impact of just letting your votes, just voting one and letting it exhaust. This is in the Legislative Council, but it's just worth noting that 70% of the votes actually exhausted. And then in the House of Assembly, obviously, the votes flowed 47 to Labor and 52% to Liberal. So, preferences play a big part in elections, and unfortunately there isn't a lot of it proper education, and there's a lot of people trying to make people aware of the impact of preferencing. And of course, as I always say, it's up to the voter to preference. It's not up to political parties. Make a suggestion, sure, but you as a voter are the ones that actually preference the candidates or the parties that you choose to. Is that the kind of message that you'd send out?
Yes, so people get very concerned about the party's preference deals, as they call it, but really there aren't any deals anymore. There is no ticket. In the olden days, the parties had to file a ticket. And if you put 1 next to, say, Family First or the Liberal Party, then your votes went according to the preference ticket that had been lodged with the Electoral Commission. That's no more. That doesn't happen. You get to choose. So the parties can give a how to vote card, which might say vote 1 Family First, 2 One Nation, 3 Liberal, 4 something else, etc. But you do not have to follow that. You prepare, and what I encourage everyone to do is to think before you go to the polling booth. Think which parties you want to put as preferences, and then go and do that. A vote for a minor party is not a wasted vote. So some of the majors run that line. If you vote for a minor party, it's a wasted vote. But that is not the case, because you can say 1 Family First. If you want your second preference to be Liberal, you can put 2 Liberal. And so if Family First doesn't get up, your vote shifts to the Liberal Party or to the Labor Party or whatever it is. So it's not a wasted vote. So think and you make up your mind. It's not up to the parties can make suggestions, but you have the freedom to choose.
Yeah, and my message has always been is that if your alignment, your values and your alignment is, say, with Family First, you would need to look at a candidate where your values align next in line. So, it would be pretty polarizing having your number 1 for Family First and then putting your second choice for Greens, because I think the ideology is polar opposites. But anyway, there might be some cases of that, but I doubt
You'd be surprised. I think in the last state election, we had about 20% of people, or maybe a bit less, who voted 1 Family First, 2 Greens.
Wow, that's interesting. That's an interesting concept.
Yeah. Don't quote me on those numbers, but it was a significant amount of votes.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So I guess it's probably a good time to go into some of the key policies. Now, this is the website, your Family First South Australia one, and obviously there's a bit of a foreword on the website there from Deepa, and that is your lead Senate candidate, Deepa Matthews, SA Legislative Council candidate, Family First Party. Now, one of the key things, and I've seen the ads going around, is obviously this big talking point is taking the pressure off the cost of living. So I wanted to touch this first one here up the top here. It says the major parties have consistently failed South Australian families by continually putting upward pressure on the cost of livings. Now, these are some of the things that are contributing to that. So Australia's immigration levels are too high and unsustainable. It's putting pressure on the cost of everything from housing to groceries to healthcare. Family First will fight to dramatically cut Australia's net overseas migrations. Now, let's unpack that a little bit first, because that is very polarising, even that stance, because the parties like Labor in particular, or Greens, will argue, and they've called people like myself and others that have gone to rallies which talk about excessive migration and calling us as racist. So even just to have that wording on there could be quite polarizing. But why is that there for Family First as well, Christopher? How much of an impact is that actually on our state and our country?
So let me preface that by saying that both Deepa and I are migrants, and in my case, I'm the son of migrants. So we are for migration. So that's the first thing to say. Migration is a good thing. But if you remember that slide, it said net overseas migration. That's the key term. Because what's happened, particularly post-COVID, is that net overseas migration has gone from about 200,000, perhaps a bit less, to about 500,000. And that is the problem. That level is unsustainable. And that level is causing problems right across the board. I was hearing today that there's something like 2 million non-citizens now who are here, who are like a working underclass. I don't like the word class, but and that level of net overseas migration is what's going to be brought back, and we need to bring it back to historical levels. There can be debate about the numbers. Some say about 140, some say 200. That can be debated on, but I think our issue is that numbers got to come back, and that's overall that's a federal issue. But in our state, we want to put that forward and be arguing for it, and that's why we need a strong independent voice in the Legislative Council so that some of these issues can be properly canvassed. Excuse me, just grab a drink.
Yeah, no, that's okay. But you're doing a bit of talking.
Yeah, so I think that's the answer to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So still in line with the cost of living then, you've got the other one is freeing up more land for housing, taking the pressure off young families, as well as the Bank of Mum and Dad. Family First will fight to remove green and red tape, but that's currently blocking new housing. Now, housing is obviously a massive impact for young people. I've got young adult children, and it's, the cost of housing and rentals is astronomical compared to when we got in the market, or even my parents. And so how hard do you think it will be to remove a lot of that red and green tape, but also opening up more land? I mean, are you aware of a lot of land around South Australia that could potentially be opened up? Is it owned by private landholders? Is there a lot of state-owned land? And then we've also got to consider the land managed and owned by Aboriginal Australians as well.
So I think, Mark, it's going to take a lot of hard thinking, but I think it's possible. As an illustration, when we bought our first house back about 200 years ago now, back in 1991, our house was 3 times my annual salary. Now, and that was a reasonable salary. I was working as a lawyer. My son is a lawyer. He's about the similar age, or a bit younger than I was in the profession. But he would have to, it would now take him about 10 times his annual salary to buy the equivalent house. So that's what's happened across the board. Now, so we have to do something about that. But South Australia has always led the way has historically led the way in housing. I mean, under Sir Tom Playford, we had the best housing trust, SA Housing, in the country. And so we can do something, and we can look at opening up land areas. The issue of limiting the amount of hoops people have got to go through to get permission to build houses, etc., is important. People in some suburbs object to urban infill, but we're going to have to live with that, I think. And then long-term, looking to develop the infrastructure for the north and south so that couples and families can buy houses in those spreading areas up north and down south. There's some of the things that we have to work on. Now, I don't want to, if we get in, we'll be one voice in the upper house, so we don't control the levers of government, but we can argue persuasively for some of these things.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, I've thought about this quite a bit. I mean, in the regions, in certain smaller towns, there's plenty of scope for moving out. That way it's encouraging, maybe even looking at encouraging people to be able to take that up, bring some trades and professions out to the already established smaller towns of the regions as well. But again, there's so many other factors to cost of living that's impacting South Australians or even Australians. So there's a long way to go, but part of that is, like you say, is having a much more independent either federal Senate and Legislative Council in the states to be able to challenge the major parties in regards to some of the policies that they're pushing through with their majorities. Now, the next one is actually a really big one, and a lot of people pushing back on this is the renewables. So you've got Family First will fight to slow the race to renewables. The major parties' climate ideology has done nothing to change climate. It has only piled more pressure on families who are already struggling with the cost of living. Now, I follow this quite closely as well. We've blown up our coal-fired power station. Australia, we only contribute about 1% of CO2 globally, yet we're really seem to be destroying our energy infrastructure and going down. Net zero 2027 is what the Labor government's aiming for. They were the first to declare a climate emergency in this state, obviously. So there's lots of other things. So the renewables is a real a big thorn in the state side, even the countryside, in regards to cost of living pressures. So that's a pretty big policy line to have there as well.
Yeah, so that's, if you think about it, Mark, power affects the cost of everything. The cost of power affects the cost of everything. So if you want to look at the rising cost of living, the underlying rise in the cost of power, and it's been massive in this state, we have probably among the most expensive power in the world in South Australia. And it's very clear that while renewables promise cheaper energy, as renewables go up, the cost of power goes up. And that is obvious for these reasons. And this will take a bit of time to unpack. But firstly, if you build a power station which has, say, a capacity of a certain amount of kilowatts, a coal power station, that'll give you about 80% of the faceplate of what the machine can actually produce. But with wind and solar can ever only produce 50% of what its faceplate does, because the sun doesn't shine all the time, or less than 50%. And wind, similar. Or wind it gets down to about 30% or something like that. So you have to build double the capacity to get to the amount of power production that you want. So that's number one. Number two, if you build a coal-fired power station or a gas-fired power station, that'll last you about 50 years. If you build a nuclear power station, that'll last you about 80 to 90 years. If you build wind and solar, that'll last you 25 years or something less. So that means for every coal-fired power station or gas, you have to build 2 lots of wind and 2 lots of solar. So that's increasing your costs. Then dense energy, gas, coal, nuclear, is produced in one place, and the grid lines flow out from all of that. Solar is diffused power generation, and wind is diffused power generation. So you can drive up to the mid-north and you see all along the way, along those beautiful hills, wind turbines. But that means we have to build a distribution network to take all of that wind which is being produced up in the mid-north and then bring it back to a central point, a completely new distribution network, and then distribute it out from the substations, etc., to people. So that's an additional cost. You can't use the existing grid lines. But then the kicker to all of that is that wind and solar can never produce power all the time. So for it to work, you've got to have air batteries, which is another system, which again has to be replaced every 25 years. But you also have to have what they call firming, that is either coal or gas that has got to keep going, so that when the wind and sun starts to shine, wind drops, we have power to work. And that's what's happened just this last few days. In the last few days, most of Victoria's power has been coal. I'm sorry. And so, because those power stations have to keep operating when they're not being used, they have to charge very high amounts when they are being used to keep operating. So the effect of all of that is that if we go 100% wind and solar, we have to have it will economically destroy us. That there's no way out of this. We have to turn back. It's going to cost about 3 or 4 times the amount of 2 or 3 coal or gas or nuclear to go solar, and it will destroy us economically. That is the reality that we're now facing. So regardless of what you think about climate change, we cannot go this route. We have to turn. We have to turn. And that's what we have to keep arguing. Now, this is a massive issue. It's like one of those big, I've just been up to Kubapidi with my daughter, and you have these road trains. You can't turn them very quickly, but we have to start.
Yeah, the iceberg's dead ahead, and we're trying to turn the Titanic. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no disagreement there. I've talked to lots of people in regards to this, but yet it seems like the Labor Party is hell bent on trying to continue to push down this path, and you have to wonder, you have to really ask some deep questions about why. So, thank you for that. And when just moving on to the next one, then is obviously another taking pressure off healthcare. So you shouldn't have to wait weeks to be able to see a GP or health professional, yet the major parties' healthcare policies have led to just that. Weeks-long waiting times to see a doctor and constant ambulance ramping at our hospitals. Family First will take the pressure off our healthcare system by investing in frontline medical services, will increase GP availability and force the major parties to finally prioritise fixing the ramping crisis. So this is quite a big one, but I want to premise kind of where I'm at with my thinking, so you can sort of maybe answer that as well. I've caught up and I've interviewed Professor Ian Brighthope, who is very much into integrative medicine, the wellness centre. So looking at dealing with health and disease before it gets so bad where people have to rely on a health system or sickness system. Are you, or do you believe Family First Party yourself, in favour of looking at those sorts of things and talking to health professionals that are into that integrative medicine and wellness kind of thinking to look at freeing up our healthcare system? That's one thing, building more hospitals, putting more beds in, putting more ambulance in, but is there scope to be able to underpin better health in the first place? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, we don't have a policy on that, but my view is that health comes from our bodies and not from medicine. So we have to look after our bodies, and that is sleep, exercise, diet, and community. And that's why we argue for Family First, because families are the best social security network that has ever been invented, and healthy families lead to healthy people. That works in a number of ways. In simple ways, healthy families communicate healthy eating. So my wife helps out in a program to help young mums who are at risk of losing their children to social welfare because of various problems that they have. And one of the things that she says is a lot of these young mums that she has to deal with, they don't know the simplest thing about cooking. or the simplest thing about how to buy good food. And so they do this, the easy thing like buy junk food, etc. Now, that comes from a failure of family life way back when they were kids. Because my wife comes from, her dad died when she was 9. She was brought up by her mum. She and her sister, mum was a single parent. She was a nurse, she worked, but she taught her daughters how to live. She taught her how to cook properly, how to eat healthily, and that's coming. And my wife went on and became a dietitian, and so that is a fundamental issue. And in this is a bit unrelated to what you said, but it isn't really. The breakdown of the family unit in Australian society is a significant cause of a lot of the health issues that we have. And I know that a lot of the mental health issues that come across the paths of doctors are as a result of what's happened with broken families. That is a really serious issue. And I know some young people who run camps for foster kids, and some of the problems these foster kids have is a direct result of the breakdown of families. So that's a really important issue in terms of answering the whole healthiness of our population. And I think if we can do something there, we can help with all of that, the whole integrated medicine, etc. Because that sort of stuff is, while we now have experts, and nothing wrong with them in integrated medicine, etc., a lot of that's caught in the home, in a healthy, functioning home. So, and that's front and center family first policy.
Some would also argue that the response over the last 5 years to obviously COVID and the way that government reacted to that contributed a lot to the not so health and well-being of the population. We've had lockdowns and masks and all those sorts of things, lots of mandates and that. So there's a lot of massive contributing factors. But you're right. And I think I saw an article come through that even our housing crisis can be attributed to broken families, where and divorce rates, because both partners now need to look at houses, and it's an increasing. So there's lots of family fractures, and that you're right, would be affecting the overall health and well-being of families, children, the adults involved as well. Yeah. And we could you could shout off put as much money, continue raising taxes and put more hospitals up, more more ambulances, more health staff. But unless you're fixing the underlying problem, then it's going to be a bottomless well, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right.
Now, another big one for me personally, because I did follow the school incident with the kids being taught inappropriate content, and it made its rounds around our state. But taking pressure off school education is another big one, and I follow this quite closely myself. I was in contact with the people from Guardian South Australia who were actively involved with things that are being taught in school. But in regards to taking pressure off education, our schools are in crisis. They're putting a wedge between you and your kids by teaching them dangerous gender ideologies. Not only is this dangerous, but it's just one more thing for parents to worry about. You shouldn't have to worry about what your kid is being taught in school. Families First will take pressure off education on parents by getting education back to basics. We'll support non-government schools and give parents more choice about where their children are educated and the values they're taught in school. So, and before I get you to kind of talk into that a little bit more, we know that there's constantly pressure from the South Australian Greens and the Greens in regards to challenging faith-based schools on their hiring practices of people with similar values. So that's another thing that I guess is important for candidates like yourself and Deepa to be in the Legislative Council to be able to push back on that on behalf of parents that are concerned about this drift. Is that right?
Yep, exactly right. So we will never agree to the Greens' proposals to remove the protective clauses or balancing clauses from the Anti-Discrimination Act. We will fight that tooth and nail.
Yep, yep. And that's the content that that they're teaching in some of these schools. It's just that slow creep, and it hasn't happened by accident. A lot of people are saying there's obviously a deliberate, almost agenda to get this sort of stuff into schooling. We had safe schools and all those sorts of programs that kind of come out heavily in Victoria and that. So it almost seems like there's a deliberate attempt to get this into schools. Your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We hear a lot about what's happening in Victoria. It's happening here, right from preschool. Children are being taught that you choose whether you're a boy or a girl, that there's sex and gender is on a continuum, and it flows right the way through, right to high school. The South Australian Education Department has a policy and a procedure document in relation to kids with gender confusion, and those documents expressly say, and you can check it out on the website, that if a child wants to adopt a different name at school and the parents don't agree, the site leader has the right to allow that child to be called by its preferred name at school and to use the proper name to the parents, so in effect to deceive the parents. Now, that came in under the Weatherall government. I raised it with the then Shadow Minister, John Gardner, before he became the Education Minister. When he became the Education Minister, I met with the Chief of Staff and raised it. They did nothing. When Blair Boyer became the Education Minister, I met with him personally and raised it with him, and he did nothing. So this is an area where the two majors have deliberately allowed this to happen. And we will fight this with everything we have. We will expose it, because one of the great curatives for this is sunlight. They run for cover. They do not want this exposed. But we will continue to expose it, what's happening. And it's in the curriculum, it is embedded. It takes a long time to find it. You generally find it in health and phys ed, buried in there. I've had the privilege of being able to read some of these some of these curricular documents. They're not readily available. And we have to expose it, and we will do that. We will do that, because this is destroying kids. This is absolutely confusing and destroying kids, and it has to stop.
Yeah. Well, I also wrote concerns in regards to a lot of states are changing their tact in regards to puberty blockers for minors and the harms of that. And still obviously haven't had a response. I copied in Liberal as well, but it's quite disappointing that with these sorts of things that it has to rely on people like yourself, Family First, if you happen to get elected, to be really challenge this and push this to the forefront, where you're almost expected that this should be something that the Liberal Party should be doing quite heavily as well, but unfortunately not. So it needs people that will challenge it up in the Legislative Council, but hopefully also candidates in the lower house as well.
Yeah, the only thing that's ever changed the world, Mark, is small groups of people committed. So there's no point bemoaning that the big boys aren't doing it. We've got to get off our butt and do something, and we can. And we've been fighting in this space. I've been fighting in this space for years now. I'm running cases. I helped run a conference last year, and we can bring change, and it is coming slowly. Queensland's now changed, Northern Territory's changed. South Australia's got a terrible policy that says that kids who are being sent to puberty blockers do not need, as of course, to see a psychiatrist to get assessed before they go on there. That's written into our policy. That's got to be exposed. So we've got a lot of work to do. But one of the things we will do is bring in a parental rights bill that will say that parents have got the school has to tell the parents what they're going to teach. And the parents have got the right to exclude their children from any classes like that. The government acknowledged that in that Renmark case, there's public knowledge, that they had failed in obtaining consent of parents when those terrible things were taught. So we have to be in there fighting for this. This is our kids. This is our kids and our grandkids, and we can't drop the ball on this.
Yeah, I 100% agree. There'll be no arguments for me. So getting close to the end of your page there, social unrest is the next one. You ought to be able to raise your family and community that's safe and united by a common set of Australian values. Family First will take youth crime seriously because your family deserves to feel safe in your local neighbourhood, because there's obviously there's reports of even in the country areas in regards to crime rising. We'll support and promote Australian values like the celebration of Australia Day, and we'll fight to ensure that what migrants Australia does take in adopt our values and way of life. So just want to unpack that one, and then we'll do that final one in a minute too. So that's quite a big one. We've just had Australia Day. It's the usual debate about the Australian flag, the usual debate about Australia Day versus Sorry Day or whatever it is that they want to label it on any given day, or colonialist oppression day. It's good to see a policy like that. Obviously, there would be a bit of pushback from others in regard, especially I guess the Greens and maybe even Labor. I was very surprised that some very senior Labor ministers put up a post in regard to Pakistan, I think Federation Day or something like that, but then failed to acknowledge Australia Day, and that really was very surprising. Well, I guess it wasn't surprising, but that they're so blatant about it. But good to see in your policy, and it's quite brave to have that there.
Yeah, well, I think, Mark, we've got to say that Australia is a good country. It's not a perfect country. We've got lots of things we've done wrong, lots of things we do wrong and will continue to do wrong, because that's we're made up of imperfect people. But the comparator of Australia isn't a perfect country. The comparator is the rest of the world. And I reckon there's a pretty good argument that there aren't many countries that are doing it better, if any. So I think we've got to celebrate Australia. I mean, what's happened? I'm a migrant. We came here in 1971, and I've been accepted in this country. I've had a privileged position in the sense that I can say that I have never experienced any actual racism in this country. Sure, on the rugby field, somebody may have said something, or in the schoolyard, but I stood up for myself. I was playing hockey once in the country. Somebody said something. I walked off the pitch and put a hockey stick in their face, and that was dealt with. Okay, so, but what has been achieved is a remarkable thing. I mean, from the First Fleet to now, we've built a thriving country where there are freedoms for people to express all sorts of views, including views about the problems in the country and people who want to call it Invasion Day, etc. Now, that's a good thing that has happened in this, and we have to celebrate that good thing. And I think the tide is turning, because last week there was a poll saying that 70% of Australians want to retain Australia Day, and that's good, because the First Fleet itself was a remarkable achievement. They looked after those prisoners so well that the prisoners landed in Botany Bay or Port Jackson, wherever they landed, in better condition than when they left England, and we created an egalitarian country out of a country which had a significant class system. That's a remarkable achievement. So let's acknowledge where we've gone wrong, and we have, but let's celebrate the remarkable achievement that Australia is. So that's why we want to advance Australia Day and support the promotion of the virtues that are key to Australia.
Yeah, and it's a big one to put in there about the type of migrants that we do accept in this country. And I don't think it's unreasonable for any country to say these are our standards, and when you come here you accept that. It should be a privilege to come here. I know my parents are migrants. They adopted it, they worked hard, they contributed, but they considered themselves very blessed to have Australia home. And obviously myself and my brothers were born here, so we're first generation. My parents were migrants, and I don't know any other home than Australia. My children and my grandchildren are born here now, and it's about advancing it for the betterment of all of us. But again, it's like there seems to be a deliberate divisionary manipulation going on in a lot of areas in our life, and it's just being able to have set standards to say this is what we accept as a country going forward, to unify. But it doesn't seem to have come from the major parties in that regard, and it really needs some, Australians need proper direction from proper leaders.
That's right, and we need to go no further than our constitution, as I said at the start, to espouse those virtues that are built into our constitution. And if you're not going to play in that game, then you can't play in this team. That's just the way it is. If you don't want to wear the Port Adelaide colours, don't go and train at Port Adelaide. So if you can't be a part of a culture that says we're all equal, and that we all have the right to freedom of religion and freedom to proselytize freely without fear, freedom of expression, freedom of association, thought, conscience and belief, etc., then you can't be a part of this country.
Yeah, no, well said. Well said. And this one you've got down as a final, and it's also another big one for me because I push back on a little bit as well, is finally we stand up for women and girls' rights. The danger posed to women by biological males in sport is predictable result of the major parties' woke social agenda. For decades, they have sought to de-gender our laws and have removed the legal definition of male and female from our state's law. Family First will introduce legislation to reinstate these legal definitions. Yeah, very powerful. And I note that the Premier copped some pushback when he wouldn't open up into the regards to the male in the female prison scenario and all these sorts of things. And this is affecting obviously schools and other places. So locker rooms, change rooms, toilets, girls and women's sports. So it's a massive issue. I've got daughters, it's got, wife and others. It's a real concern amongst the community, but this is the wording there about this social agenda. It seems like Labor and the Greens are buying into that, but even Liberals haven't been pushing back on it very hard. But parties like Family First obviously are.
Yeah. So a society that's not built on truth will collapse, and the truth is that we are sex beings. We are male or female, and that's what it is. It is a binary world. There are some with disorders of sexual development, but that's just a disorder. It doesn't affect the truth. And so we have to build our society on that. The whole doctrine of gender confusion is a Marxist-based doctrine, and it is false. It is based on ideology. It is not true, and it must be confronted and must be stopped. And so where that works out is that we have to have you shouldn't be saying this, but a proper legal definition that of a woman and a man in legislation. And we have to support particularly young girls that they can play sport freely, competing against other young girls. So a friend of mine has done some research in New South Wales in the little athletics in primary school over a number of years. In every category except agility, this is primary school pre-pubescent children, in every category except agility, boys hold all the records. That's just what it is, because boys are stronger than girls even before puberty, because at birth there's an injection of testosterone to males, which gives them that greater strength and speed and agility, power, etc. So if we want to have girls sport, we have to have single-sex sport.
Yeah, no, I agree. There's a lot of work to be done in that regard, and I guess that's what brings me to the end. Is obviously that's why you and Deepa are running in the Legislative Council, to be able to hold these people to account. And this is what it says at the bottom of your page, is putting the pressure back on the major parties, which I guess is what you're hoping to achieve. This mess was created by the major parties. It was Labor, Liberals and Greens that created these crises. When Vote Family First, One Family First, you're sending a message to the major parties to take the pressure off families. If enough South Australians vote number one, Family First, the major parties will be forced to listen to our voices and our families. So that is obviously the page and your key policies there. And I guess that's the thing, the message goes out there. Now, do you believe that, the Liberal Party's imploded? Do you believe there's a lot of Liberal voters that traditionally would align with Family First Party values? Do you sort of think that there might be a place for them to come to Family First from Liberal?
I would sincerely hope so, and I think the answer to that is yes. Obviously, I haven't done any deep research on every Liberal voter, but from the feel I get in talking to people, I think that's right. Deepa Matthew was a Liberal. She quit the Liberals because of abortion to birth. And there are lots of other people like that who, that abortion to birth legislation in 2021 was really critical for lots of people. And because the Liberal Party pushed that so much, a lot of people shifted and started to look for another home for their vote. So yeah, I would hope that people who are concerned about the fundamentals of our country and who listen to this website, and it's called Faith, Culture, Politics. We would promote faith to affect culture and so affect politics. And so that's why we would ask you to vote Family First.
Yeah, no, good on you. Well, we were talking about an hour. We've gone over a bit, but I just wanted to finish up because obviously it's a call to action as well. I did do some articles in regards to Liberal and Labor, obviously being a two-horse race. The legacy media obviously supports and platforms the major parties a lot more than parties like yourself or even One Nation or others. Then we've got obviously the changes to the electoral funding laws and all those. So there's actually a lot of barriers for parties like Family First and others to really get out there and get that exposure out there. So what's your call to action to people in regards to support, what they'd like to do, reach out, all those sorts of things? What's your sort of final sort of message and reach out for your call to action?
So obviously election day, vote on Family First, and particularly in the upper house, but we need help. We need volunteers. And you can go to the Family First website and volunteer. We need people to hand out how to vote cards on polling day and in pre-poll. People do letterboxing. And in any other way that you want to help, jump on board. You're more than welcome. And go to the website, familyfirst.org.au. It's familyfirst.org.au. And there's a place there, there's a tab there for volunteers, and you can do that. So that would be very important. And I just want to say this election is so important for us to get an independent upper house with strong minor parties, because of the election funding laws that you mentioned. And this was a real rort put together by the Liberals and the Labor to try and cut out minor parties. Because you can't now fundraise. You can only work from the public funding. And so we have to build our vote for the sake of upholding good policies in South Australian Parliament.
Yeah, yep. And this has been my message, obviously, because I am more conservative leaning, is to the parties that are more aligned, more to centre-right conservative, is that you need to work together. And for the voters, it's really looking at your preferences. If you want people in the Legislative Council that are going to challenge the major parties, then you really need to be conscious about the votes that you put forward in March. So, Christopher, I do wish you all the very best in March for yourself and Deepa and any other of the lower house candidates that might be running for Family First. It's been a pleasure having a chat to you and getting your message out there and informing the South Australian voters about what Family First stands for and what you and Deepa are trying to achieve there in the Legislative Council in South Australia. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for having us on.
Most welcome. Good on you, Christopher. All the best.
Bye. Thank you.
Well, there you go. That was Christopher Brohier from Family First Australia Party. If that's resonated with you, follow them along. If you've enjoyed seeing this podcast, then share it with others, like and subscribe, and get others to like and subscribe as well. And to any other candidate that might be running in the South Australian state election, if you'd like the opportunity to jump on board, you can jump on that email info@fcpaustralia.com, reach out, and we'll look at getting you onto the platform. And as always, I like to finish off with one of my favourite little tunes. So I wish you all the best. God bless Australia, and God bless South Australia, and God bless all of everybody out there as well. All right, all the best. Take care.
Could I have your attention for the next 3 minutes? I'd like you to see and hear something which we feel is rather special.
Here in this God-given land of Australia, this proud possession, our own piece of earth, that was built by our fathers who pioneered our heritage. Here in Australia, the land of our birth. Australia, Australia, all of the earth and the strong and the free. It's the home and the homeland to cherish for eternity. Australia, Australia, the land of the free. Here in Australia, we treasure love and liberty. Our way of life, all for one, one for all. We're a peace, loving race, but should danger ever threaten us, let the world know we will answer the call.